Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm pleased to follow on from some great presentations already. So can you see my screen? Good. Okay, well, what I wanted to talk to you about was delivering zero carbon now and doing it with natural bio-based materials. So at the moment, my screen is not allowing me to move. Okay, it's working now. So the context, as you've heard, really is the backdrop to climate change. And I think this quote from David Attenborough sets it in context. What we do in the next 10 years will profoundly impact the next few thousand. And we see our role at Greencore really to be a catalyst. We're trying to scale up the delivery of low carbon homes until they can no longer be ignored by the mainstream house builders. So we've been steadily doing that for the last few years. And as you heard earlier, embodied carbon, or the upfront carbon as it's sometimes known, is the elephant in the room with this. When we build a new house, all of the materials that go into it produce carbon emissions. So whether they're products that are mined, quarried, processed, fired, transported, there are CO2 emissions that come from all those different parts of the process. And if you add them all together, you're looking at about 50 to 60 tons of CO2 emissions just at the construction stage of a new house. And then that's known as its carbon footprint. And then if the contractor building it has done a reasonable job, it will emit about 5 tons of CO2 per year in use. So it means that houses that we're building at the moment will be responsible for something like 200 tons of CO2 by 2050. And given that we've got a target to be zero carbon by 2050, it doesn't seem acceptable to me that we should still be contributing to the problem. We should be building houses now that don't contribute to the problem, and that would give us a chance to tackle the existing housing stock. The other thing is all of the terminology is quite confusing. When most people are talking about zero carbon, what they really are referring to is zero operational emissions. So they're building a house that doesn't emit any carbon in use or is using some mechanism to offset that carbon in use. But very often they're completely ignoring all of the embodied carbon, and in some cases they're even producing more embodied carbon in order to try and make savings of energy in the future. Our approach is that we've got to tackle both the embodied carbon and the operational carbon. And there's an organization sprung up recently that's doing a lot of lobbying on embodied carbon, and that's the Architects Climate Action Network. And some of the figures that they're quoting are quite shocking. That the carbon footprint of buildings and infrastructure accounts for over 10% of the UK's carbon emissions. And yet it's not measured, it's not reported, and there are no targets for reducing it at the moment. So this is a bit of a scandal, and we need to do something about it. Fortunately, bio-based materials are natural carbon capture and storage mechanisms. So trees and plants, as they grow, they take in carbon dioxide and they use energy from the sunlight and chlorophyll in their leaves through a process called photosynthesis, and they turn that carbon dioxide into cellulose. And if you actually go through the chemistry and the maths, it takes 1.8 kilos of CO2 to make a kilo of cellulose. So not only is it a natural way of capturing and storing carbon, it's got this great multiplication factor on its side as well. So in very simple terms, when we design and build houses, the more bio-based materials we can incorporate in the buildings, replacing other high energy materials, the more carbon we can lock up. So the choices that we make in the design and the construction don't just determine what the house looks like, but it also determines what its carbon footprint is and what its thermal performance and energy performance is going to be going forward. And we now know that we can build houses that have got zero carbon footprints and zero emissions in use. And so at Greencore, we started the company back in 2013, and since then we've done around 50 houses that have got roughly zero carbon footprints, and we're currently working on a scheme of 25 houses just outside Abingdon in a village called Southmoor, which we think is the greenest scheme in the country at the moment. Although we would love to be proved wrong, and we're absolutely convinced that our next schemes and other people's next schemes will go beyond this. So at Springfield Meadows, we've got 25 houses, 6 of them are affordable rented houses, 3 shared ownership, and 16 open market houses, which are being mainly delivered through a custom build model, and everything is built to the same standard. We don't differentiate according to whether it's an affordable house or a private house. And the simple formula or the targets that we're aiming for are that we've got houses that have 0 carbon footprint. Everything is built to the Passive House thermal standard, although it isn't certified. And that means you've got minimal heating requirements, and they should be comfortable, healthy places to live. We're aiming for net zero energy in use, which means across the year, the houses will generate as much energy from their PV panels as they use. And that obviously means that you've got lower energy bills. We've got an electric car club and a car sharing scheme. So the car club is a partnership with GridServe to provide electric vehicles. And then we're working with a smartphone app platform called Hire Car for the operation of the car club, but also to enable people to share their private cars as well. We've got a partnership with Berks, Bucks and Oxon Wildlife Trust, who've been helping us with all the wildlife and ecology and landscaping on the site. And this is all done within the One Planet Living framework that you heard Sue talk about, and has been awarded global leadership status. So the formula that we use is to use bio-based materials to lock up carbon. So that's things like timber, hemp, wood fiber insulation. And we have very high levels of insulation to give thermal performance, passive house levels of thermal performance. We design out the thermal bridges. We focus on getting excellent air tightness. We've got triple glazed timber windows and heat recovery ventilation. And then the whole heating, hot water and cooking strategy is electric, and we're using PVs to generate that electricity and batteries to store it. But this project has been on site for just about 2 years now, and through that process we've learnt a lot, and we've seen the political landscape change, and the public's awareness of climate change has increased massively. We've seen things like the climate strikes in 2019. And through that, one of the quotes that resonated with me was this great quote: "Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better." Well, the things that we've learnt as we've done this project and the ways that we've worked out how to get to 0 carbon actually allow us to get to better than 0 carbon. So we have moved forward with what we're calling climate positive housing. And we want to do 500 climate positive houses in Oxfordshire over the next 5 years. And that's simply, instead of aiming for 0 carbon, we want houses that lock up more carbon than they emit at the construction stage. They generate more energy than they use in use. And we should be massively increasing wildlife and biodiversity on the site. And we want our developments to be a catalyst for local food schemes, green transport schemes. And we're also working with local community energy schemes so that we don't just create 0 carbon housing, but we actually put energy generation in place to make neighbouring villages 0 energy as well. And one of the changes we've made is to go from using conventional joists for our floor structures to cross-laminated timber. And that takes us from being 0 carbon to well below a 0 carbon, or climate positive as we call it. We're also planning to build a green business park in Oxfordshire, because we want to create jobs locally to where we're building houses, and we want to attract other like-minded businesses to the area. So these are some commercial buildings that I've been involved in the past that are built out of hemp and have very good thermal performance. And we see a green business park in Oxfordshire also being part of the catalyst for change as well. So that's really what we're trying to do. As it says here, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And we're trying to act as an exemplar that allows other people to follow what we're doing, and politicians and legislators to actually insist that other people do it. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen there and hand back to Charlie, because I think the next phase is all about questions and discussion, really.
Thanks a lot, Ian. I have some questions as well, but has anyone got anything that following that presentation that they want to ask specifically to Ian?
I've got one. It's probably a bit techie. It's just, you talked about passive thermal performance but not certified. I just wondered why not certified? What's the...
Right, I think that's a very good question, and what we've done in the past and what we do in the future may be different. So in the past, we've chosen to take the costs that would be involved in certifying, which is typically £5,000 a house, and put that cost towards other things, particularly monitoring, where we think the value in the monitoring has outweighed having a certificate. But one of the things that I'm trying to do at the moment is lobby local councils to use the CIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, as a variable tariff, a bit like car tax. So, you know, electric cars pay zero car tax, and if you've got a V8 gas guzzler, you pay a very high car tax. It seems a very simple mechanism that if you build to the passive house standard, you ought to have a reduction in your CIL, and if you just build to ordinary building regs, you ought to pay a slightly higher CIL. And so if that sort of thing comes into play, then it will be very obvious that we would certify. The other reason for us certifying in the future is that I think we will become hypocrites if we're not careful by suggesting other people build to the passive house standard, and if we're not certifying the things that we do, I think it becomes a bit arrogant and hypocritical.
I just wondered whether there was any sort of issues around detailing and whatever that you thought were not unhelpful, but sort of, you know, some of it's not necessarily a tick boxing exercise, but there are certain things you have to meet, and I just wondered whether some of those you felt weren't as beneficial as...
I think probably the biggest challenge with certification is that orientation becomes very important. And we've talked about the planning system, or heard about the planning system earlier, that we think the planning system is not fit for purpose. It's actively discouraging sustainable construction and development at the moment. And so very often orientation is driven by streetscapes and building lines and things rather than building physics. So that's one of the reasons that certification can be challenging. The other thing is we know that we're very fortunate. The layer of hemp and lime that we have in our wall panels has a natural phase change. So the real thermal performance that gets delivered is about twice as good as that predicted in the PHPP modelling. And that becomes quite a economic and practical shortcut to passive house performance, that you might be slightly the wrong side of the line in terms of the PHPP software, but the reality is you're going to be the right side of the line when the house is finished and working. If we go to certification, we've obviously got to make sure we're the right side of the line in all respects.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Phil. Diana.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to say I'm councillor of Vale of Whitehorse, and some of my colleagues actually visited, you know, just your houses in Southmore, and actually kind of, you know, just provided amazing feedback. So just they were so excited about that. I'm just wondering, or kind of, you know, just if I understand correctly, you use prefabricated panels, kind of, you know, just doing just assembly on the site.
We do. It's all prefabricated in a factory, which is just the other side of Oxford at the moment.
Okay, so just you prefabricate locally. Okay.
Then it comes to the site as a series of flat packed panels on the back of a lorry.
Okay. But just the other thing I wanted to ask you, because again, kind of, you know, just the current approach, you know, to affordable housing, at least in Wales, you know, just I believe, you know, just elsewhere, like the developers obliged to provide some percentage of the houses as affordable, and kind of what they're doing pretty much kind of reducing the price of this, you know, affordable housing chunk and then increasing the price of the kind of open market houses. So kind of, just how you dealing with this house affordability issue in your case? Thank you.
Yes. I mean, all the projects we've done so far with affordable housing have been in partnership with Sovereign Housing Association, and we've taken the view from the start that the affordable housing should be built to the same standards as the private housing. But obviously, the mechanism for selling it to a housing association is that it's discounted, and typically it's maybe 55% of the price of open market housing. So it's generally enough to cover the cost of the construction, and it may make a very small contribution towards land value or site infrastructure, but not a lot. So from a development point of view, you have to make your money on the private houses, and that's why the private houses are priced at the sort of level they are.
That's kind of, just that's the problem I have an issue with, because I'm just, again, my feeling that, just this kind of approach or this kind of segmenting the houses into these categories, actually, it pushes the price of, just houses in an open market. I mean, just again, I don't know the answer. I don't know how to make the affordable houses, just affordable, but I feel kind of, just pushing the money, just from one, pocket to another, kind of, just that's increased that, yeah. Anyway, just a comment, just there is no answer to that right now, but yeah.
I think what I was going to say really is that the price of a house is more dictated by market conditions than its building cost. And, what developers do is that they look at what the finished value of all the houses will be, and then they subtract from that all of the sort of costs of construction, infrastructure, Section 106 costs and SIL and those sort of things, and the profit margin that they want to make, and that what's left is what they can afford to pay for the land. So there is a direct correlation that if we demand higher standards from our house builders, then it will mean they can pay a little bit less for the land. But given that land goes from, say, agricultural land at £10,000 an acre to building land at £600,000 an acre, there's a massive windfall in there for the landowner. The construction costs, we reckon, are about 40% of what somebody will pay for a finished house. So the other 60% is all land, profit, finance, planning, and those sorts of things. So
quick question actually regarding the cost. I mean, I'm just wondering again, these prefabricated houses, obviously, or kind of logically, they should reduce your total cost, just of development, or not much.
I don't think they necessarily reduce the cost. What they do is increase the quality. And I think in due course they have the potential to reduce costs, but we're a small company. We're not doing things at a large enough scale to see those benefits yet. And also back to the planning system is not set up for encouraging large numbers of identical houses where you could get an economy of scale. Our 25 house scheme, we've got 23 different house types spread across those 25 units. So there isn't much economy of scale there.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit. Yeah, I mean, just again on larger development, when there are kind of just like 200, 400, like 500 houses, usually there are few models and they kind of try them. Yeah, and kind of just again one of the just our issue with development, because what happened when they plan just which houses affordable and which kind of just for open market, and they try to kind of squeeze all affordable houses like in just in the worst just position or place, and we try and spread them equally.
Yes,
to be that's one. Yeah, but again just really interesting, and kind of just I've heard a lot about your houses just in terms of thermal isolation
Thank you.
You know,
Well,
someone told me you could hit with hairdryer.
you
And that's
can,
it.
yes. I mean, they, like all passive houses, they have a heat demand of 10 watts per square meter. And so you're talking about a 100 square meter house needing 1 kilowatt peak demand, which you can get hairdryers that are 2 kilowatts these days, I'm told, although as you probably see, I don't have much use for a hairdryer. So.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Rhiannon.
Thank you. Yes, Claire Scott from our group, Still Green, had raised this question in the plenary. We're working with Town, the developers, on a wider project that they're involved in, Love Wolverton in Milton Keynes. And the planning application's gone in. But in the course of the planning process, questions have been raised about the proposal to use cross-laminated timber.
Right.
I don't have any technical background, I should say, but I wondered if you had any thoughts about presumably safety concerns that have been raised.
If it's safety concerns, I suspect it's around fire. And one of the rather frustrating things that's happened as a backlash to Grenfell is that people have started to behave irrationally in terms of fire. The problems with fire at Grenfell were foam-based insulation materials that produce toxic gases when they burn. Things like cross-laminated timber are incredibly robust. They're very, very difficult to ignite. If they do burn, they burn very slowly and in a very predictable way, and that's always designed into the construction of the building anyway. So we've had discussions with fire consultants who basically agree that cross-laminated timber is not a fire risk, but there is an irrational backlash at the moment in the industry. It shouldn't be a problem if you're building things below 18 meters, but once you get over 18 meters at the moment, so typically 6 stories and upwards, is very difficult to use cross-laminated timber. But for everything in normal domestic housing and low rise, it shouldn't be any problem at all.
Okay. Jane, your question.
So we are at the very, very beginning. We are pre-beginning of even thinking about community housing.
Where are you based, Jane?
Henley. So what concerns me is that what is likely to happen is an effort to reduce construction costs in order to be able subsequently to reduce rentals. So how does the overall construction cost of a zero-embodied, zero-emission house compare with a conventional house, which is what, you know, is likely to be people's first thought?
Very good question. First of all, the costs of construction are often heavily disguised by house builders. So one of the things that drives cost is scale. So the big volume house builders who are building thousands of houses a year have got incredibly robust supply chains and buying agreements and really got everything nailed down. But most houses that are constructed by housing associations, local authorities, medium-sized builders, small companies like us, are all about the same price point. We don't believe that what we're doing is any more expensive than the sort of standard building regs house that's being built by local authorities, housing associations and medium-sized builders. And we've spent quite a lot of time comparing those costs. But quite often when you're comparing them, you're not comparing apples with apples, because developers, for example, their construction costs don't include any profit margin because their profit is on the land and the development. Whereas as a construction company, we charge a profit on our construction costs. And then sometimes you find that design is not included, or or maybe they're not including the preliminary costs of managing the site in there. But when you actually boil it down and get it onto a level playing field, I think we're sort of things we're talking about are about the same. Certainly there's no reason not to do them.
Great, thank you.
I don't suppose, Colin, if you've got anything to ask before I take from Phil, just you can say no. You don't have to say anything. Phil, you got a second question.
Sorry, it was more to add on to Jane's question. I mean, I'm working with a group now, and we're currently looking at build costs, and actually we're finding out what Ian says is correct. I think their costs are comparable to a more traditional form of construction. But the other thing I think I would say to Jane is, when you're even early on, I think you need to be looking at scheme viability when you are looking at your aspirations right from day one. So I think the other thing I found is that there are aspirations which, as you then go through the pricing process, some of those aspirations get lost because you just fundamentally can't afford them. So I think you just need to marry up your aspirations with work on viability.
Thank you. Does anyone know of any grants and subsidies for, building a better house from climate point of view?
I'm not aware of any. I think the view is generally, Phil, do you want to go first if you want?
No, you go in, you go. I'll just chip in after, that's all right.
I was just going to say, really, the general view is that any adjustments should be reflected in land value rather than coming from the public purse.
Okay.
And I think, sorry, just to add on, I think the thing we're finding, I mean, my background's in affordable housing, that's what I've always tried to deliver, but I think one thing that is apparent is that where there may be additional costs in order to make a property more energy efficient, lower running costs, there's no way to recoup that through the rental income. So there's a bit of an imbalance there. I mean, I think they're all the right things. We want to provide affordable housing. We want to provide properties that will last in the long term and are low cost to run, but there's no way of sort of recouping some of that initial capital input.
Actually, I think that's a really good point, Phil. The project we've done at Springfield Meadows, we've put solar panels on all the affordable housing so that they're net zero energy in use, but the residents get the benefit of the energy, but they're not paying a higher rent for it, and consequently the housing association can't pay a higher value for the house. So that was effectively £40,000 worth of PVs that were donated to those affordable houses. It's certainly possible to do that on a one-off basis because we were trying to prove a point, but I think it would be difficult to expect developers to continually give away PVs to affordable housing. So there does need to be some sort of mechanism, and there are things emerging. There's a company in South Wales called Zero who've developed a concept which is about affordable living, and so what they're saying is that the affordability for a family is not just about the rent, it's about the rent, the energy, the transport. Yeah. And they're trying to create an affordability package for all of those things. And they've had some success working with a local authority. They're building 34 houses at the moment, and they've managed to persuade the local authority that all 34 houses are affordable under that definition. So consequently, they haven't had to designate half of them as affordable and half of them as private. They're all deemed to be affordable, which improves the economics for them building them.
Sounds brilliant. How do you spell Zero if I'm looking them up?
Charlie's just put the link in the chat. It's
oh, thanks. Thank you.
But I think we'll start. Sorry, go on, Ian.
These are the sort of things that we need to iron out, aren't we? The idiosyncrasies where you can't link the improvement to the reward or the saving. You've got to be able to close that loop.
I've got a question about retrofit. So that's something that I wanted to bring into here as to whether your model is something that within cities we're looking to and towns we're looking to densify quite heavily going forwards, and existing plots don't offer the right densities at an urban scale to be affordable, sustainable, you know, and I was wondering whether or not your scheme can make use of airspace, so going onto the tops of buildings, whether you think it can be an option for getting into smaller sites and gaps that are currently underutilized, or whether you wouldn't mess around with that and you would look to demolish sites and, you know, really start from scratch and do it properly from the beginning.
I don't think there's a one size fits all. In my career, I've been involved with construction for nearly 35 years and sustainable forms of construction for about 20 years. And I have been involved in various retrofit projects over the years, but within Greencore, we've deliberately steered clear of them because as a small company, we felt we need to be extremely focused on doing one thing and doing it really, really well, and learning our lessons from that before we strayed into other areas. So we haven't really got involved in retrofit, but building up on top of existing buildings into airspace is very straightforward. But I think the retrofit argument generally is that there are obviously lots of different types of existing buildings, some of which perform very badly and some you can upgrade relatively easily, but there is a portion that performs badly and is extremely difficult to upgrade. And the argument in the past for not demolishing and replacing has been that there was a lot of embodied energy in them, and demolishing them and rebuilding them would release a lot more embodied carbon into the atmosphere. But if you can actually get to the point as we have, where a new house is locking up more carbon than it emits, that argument goes away, and it's very much easier to look at demolishing and rebuilding those hard to retrofit houses. So we're not yet getting involved in retrofit, but when we do, that will be the sort of first area that we look at. The other thing you talked about was tight spaces. Because we use natural insulation materials, our walls are slightly thicker than normal walls. Not a lot, but in very tight spaces that can make a difference.
Okay, thanks. And the second one is often when it comes to factory built methods, there's an opportunity for citizen-led groups to get involved in the construction in some way, which might be turning up to the factory one day and popping some insulation panels in, or do you do that? And is that an important part of residents feeling connected to your manufacturing process?
We don't do that at the moment. It's something we have considered for the future, but I think probably the easiest model for residents getting involved is for us to do the shell of the building, to get it to an airtight, watertight and thermally efficient shell, and then hand it over to a group of residents for finishing off. When it comes to things like plumbing, electrics, plastering, decorating, although we have to do them to finish houses, we don't bring anything different really, or any value to that process. That can be done by anybody. The bit that we bring value to is being able to get this thermally efficient, watertight, airtight shell. And so if we're going to scale up, we need to do more of that and less of the fit out and finishes. And also it's an opportunity for clients or community groups to save money. We've got some clients at the moment where we're just going to be building shells for them, and they're going to be managing all the following trades. Great,
thanks. I'm just going to message everyone to say we're about to go back in 60 seconds. Thanks a lot for that presentation, Ian, and for the conversation that we've just had. Thanks everyone for contributing.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll bring it back to the main room to summarize it.
Right, I'll see you all back in the main room. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.